The thing to understand about Getting Over It is that it was at least partly made with an intent to be observed secondhand. The developer, of which the game gets its subtitle from, previously had massive viral success with a free game called QWOP. This is natural. It's a very simple but endlessly mimetic little time waster. It's the perfect game to record yourself playing. So, even if Bennett wasn't too optimistic on the success of Getting Over It while it was in development, he certainly knew that people would play it and record themselves just because he made it, and they did, which is good because all the footage in this video was stolen from Let's Play channels. But the question is, what kind of game would you make if you knew that the reactions would be saved for all to see? I wonder. So, anyways, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is my favorite game of all time, and I'm gonna try and say why. I should explain how this game works. So, you play as this guy, and the only way you can move is by swinging this hammer at the ground, no moving or jumping. This is all at once completely unfamiliar and also physically impossible. But what's the objective? Well, the objective is simply to climb a mountain made entirely of pre-made assets, as Bennett himself provides commentary on the game's inspirations and his motives for making it. But here's the gimmick. Contrary to the usual conventions of difficult games, being generally forgiving by way of frequent checkpoints and incremental ramping of challenge, Getting Over It offers no such consolation. There is only one massive stage, and by pure virtue of the game existing within one seamless space, it is possible to lose devastating amounts of progress after making only one mistake. There are no checkpoints, only places where it is slightly harder to fall all the way back to the beginning of the game. To play Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is to constantly exist under the looming threat that one wrong swing of the hammer will condemn poor Diogenes to a graceful cascading descent to the very start.
Love wants to give.
So, what's there to analyze here? Well, a lot actually. This is my favorite game of all time, as I previously mentioned. This is your chance to pick the game up on Steam and give it a go yourself. It's $8 in case you were wondering. I advise you turn the cursor off. I personally found it extremely distracting. I finished the game 4 times without it, so it can't have been that important. Also, play Celeste. That comes up. It's good. But before we even get into subtext, which I assure you there is plenty, I'd like to say this is a pretty tightly designed game. When you start Getting Over It, you emerge without context from your pot on a cloudy day by the seaside. You take a bit of time to learn the controls.
You're using that to propel yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, why is he in a pot?
The first thing you're asked to do is to get over this dead tree. This might take a while.
Good. Yeah!
I think this is a fantastic way of getting the user acclimated to the indirect nature of the interface in a consequence-free zone before getting to the brutal parts. After futzing around this area for a while and probably failing to get over the tree, we get a little introduction from Bennett.
There's no feeling more intense than starting over.
Now isn't that nice? This first little bunch of hurdles is another mini tutorial. The only way to get past this outhouse is to find some way to propel yourself by swinging from the tree trunk or using your hammer as a pogo stick. See, these controls aren't bad, as some people would have you believe. It's actually very precise and consistent. It's just the unfamiliarity that puts some people off. But, as we learned from Portal, unfamiliar mechanics means that half of this game needs to be a tutorial just so it isn't impossible. This area also acts as a primer for the general flavor that we'll be dealing with as we climb. You can get pretty far just by flailing about, but it's this point that forces a bit more ingenuity beyond just swinging clockwise. This beam is the first slanted obstacle that we're meant to hoist over, so we learned that we need to move slowly for the hammer to stick. But then we get this thing. Since this game has gotten so popular, different parts of the mountain have gotten their own colloquial names. This is Devil's Chimney. I consider it the first real challenge the game throws at you. When I first arrived at this part, it felt like I was trying to poke my finger through a sheet of cardboard. You're forced to confront the unfamiliar and awkward controls head on.
Oh, that's how we do it. And then we gotta just tuck it in, boy!
I think that if you can get past this part, you already have the capability to finish this entire game if you give it enough work. After that, the sky turns blue and you reach what looks like a checkpoint. This is also where the narration starts getting to the point of everything, but we'll talk about that a bit later. This vertical wall is important because it teaches the player how to hoist themselves upwards without pushing away from the surface. Then there's this beautiful moment where you find out that you have to start traveling back leftwards over open air and the checkpoint isn't actually a checkpoint at all. Moving forward a couple seconds, this hole right here is the first place it's really possible to lose a cataclysmic amount of progress, and it's pretty great seeing people's reactions to falling there.
Just rotate that. Can I reach? No, of course I can't. Ah! No!
within me a peace above all earthly dignities. A still and quiet
House! I
conscience.
land on the damn house!
This little gauntlet of yard appliances generally can't be passed with slow movements. The umbrella here is just a bit too big to reach over without it being awkward. This whole section becomes far easier when the player learns to be simultaneously quick and precise. Just a bit later, this drop to the lower pile of cardboard boxes helps you cope with the wonky interaction between the cursor and the camera.
No, stop bouncing. See, I don't do that bounce. I do not do that bounce. That bounce is a result of the camera moving and recoiling, which is the stupidest mechanic.
And then, the stairs. The first way people learn to do this is to sort of suspend yourself sideways and quickly flick over the hammer to slowly move up the stairs step by step. When you do this, you learn that the head of your hammer actually has a tangible shape. It takes up space and rolls as you lift yourself, so you learn to be careful with where you place it. Then there's this straight vertical gauntlet of furniture that will probably take a while to get past, but after this filing cabinet fucks up your day several times, you make it over and the path grows horizontal once more. And here's another part that's gotten its own colloquial name. This is Orange Hell. It's a, quite frankly, unprecedented difficulty spike. It requires both the quick and precise flinging for this first part, along with the slow as concrete hoisting for these slanted rock surfaces. Knowing how the head of your hammer rolls, where it will stick, and where it will slide off is absolutely essential. Really, the entire game has been building up to this point. On top of that, failing here results in a great fall. The best you can hope for is that you land on the slide, but you usually end up back by the grill. It's even possible to launch yourself far enough to the left that you end up back before the dead tree that you start beside. By the time you make it past these rocks, you will know intimately the strength and endurance of your character and the friction of the hammer. You will be wholly capable of anything the game throws at you, and Bennett knows it. Look at that. Honestly, seeing that little thumbs up sticking out of the wall is probably the single greatest satisfaction I've ever had with a video game. Oh, also, there's a jump scare here.
Oh! No! Oh my god! Fuck! 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 Fuck!
After you get over the steeple, the game gets a lot more forgiving. For a while, it's very hard to fall back behind this point. The two hardest jumps in the game come right after this, but there's pretty much no consequence for failing them. Jumping across these floating stones is pretty easy. You can still mess up and fall back before those two jumps though, so it's not nothing. This part seems mostly to be a joke at the player's expense, having these huge-ass rocks stationary in the air while your player character is constantly under threat of falling. I thought it was funny at least. This next part, I'd say, contains two of the only design missteps that the game takes. One, this fucking bucket. I see this bucket in my sleep. I see it when I close my eyes. It haunts me. The bucket is a physics object. You're supposed to grab onto it and swing up to these planks, but it's easier said than done. It's a complete crapshoot whether your hammer actually grabs onto the bucket or not, and while people complain about the camera issue a lot, I'd say this is the only place where it really gets in the way and becomes counterintuitive. Then we get the second misstep, this sheer ice mountain. It's actually too steep for your hammer to latch on. You have to find out that there's several little invisible footholds that you can grab onto. This is the only time in the game where the level design is dishonest, where the shape of the surface isn't what you see. It's definitely not the choice I would make. Up to this point, I'd say the game could pride itself on its transparency. It's not that big a deal though, it's just an out-of-character puzzle moment. Anyways, the last challenge is this radio tower. It's a lot like that vertical wall from the beginning, but somehow far harder and you can still launch yourself back to the bottom of the ice cliff. When you get to the top, gravity turns off and you have a bit of fun bouncing along these asteroids before the credits roll. Right after I beat getting over it for the second time, I played the other indie game from the past year or so that uses climbing a mountain as a metaphor for accomplishment. And now that I've finished the game, all of it except for the golden strawberries, because fuck that, I have a few things to say. Celeste might look like yet another retro-styled independent platformer with spikes in it, but it differentiates itself in a few key ways. For one, it has this dashing mechanic. Pressing a key in midair causes the player character named Madeline to dash a short distance in one of 8 directions, although this can only be done again after Madeline has made contact with the ground. But then the game introduces these floating green crystals that replenish your dash, allowing Madeline to at some points go on massive dashing chains where she never touches the ground. And I'd like to say, the level design of this game is elegant. It doesn't just stop with the crystals. There's 7 main chapters and each one has a different set of gimmicks that interact with Madeline's dash and also with each other in creative and challenging ways. Like, let's look at Chapter 4, the Golden Ridge, for an example. These clouds boost you upwards if you jump at the right time. These green bubbles floop you a short distance in the direction you hold on the arrow keys. The wind fucks with your movement a bit. These black arrow blocks go... And then, before you know it, all of these gimmicks are intermingling with each other in gradually more and more complex permutations until you're blasting through freaking gauntlets of these things like it's nothing. But you already know this. Celeste is pretty much universally beloved, which will make it even more fun when I say exactly which glaring flaws are keeping this game from being perfect. Also, this is your second chance to go play it yourself. Please. I'll get to the point. Celeste exhibits pretty much every problem I have with how independent developers approach difficulty. Mainly, Celeste is inconsolably driven to not be perceived as frustrating by the player, and that's bad. Now, the game is not easy by any means. Even in the main story path, there is plenty of challenge to be had. It's important to draw a distinction between a game being difficult and a game being frustrating. For example, Celeste will grant the player irrevocable progress at almost every turn, with most levels being a very singular challenge or a short gauntlet of smaller challenges contained within a single screen. Failure only brings you to the beginning of the room, and the player is given unlimited attempts at surpassing the level they are on. It is only in a few short areas, mostly in the later chapters, that Celeste ever requires the player to surpass more than a handful of obstacles without failing, lest they be sent back to try the entire set once more. This kills the stakes. The developers want you to believe that Madeline is surpassing a great and terrible mountain, but what's really happening is the player slowly making baby steps up a hill with a safety net behind them. Out of its desire to avoid frustrating the player, the gameplay clashes with the story, and Celeste is less fulfilling. Some people might point to the optional strawberries strewn about every level, or the hidden cassette tapes that unlock a second, much harder version of the chapter that it was found in, charmingly titled the chapter's B-side. These additions bring another problem, however. I will say that I had a great time finding the strawberries and completing the B-sides, because it is on these fronts that the game has embraced frustration. We get to see each chapter's mechanics used and explored to their full potential. But I also have to mention that Celeste has a story. A very good story, in fact. It has lovable characters and a fantastic moral. What this extra optional content does is deflate the importance of the story's ending. Reaching the summit of this fabled mystical mountain isn't the most difficult task in the game. The most difficult task is the optional content that is given little to no narrative justification. Although I'd say the strawberries are mostly welcome as they are well integrated into the main path and are given a narrative reason to exist right at the end, however minor. The B-sides, on the other hand, while fun, are narratively bereft. They feel empty, as the more mechanically focused story beats are just dropped into this new context like they're nothing. Like, why even have a story if you're just gonna upstage it like this? Honestly, I keep on expecting this game to pull like a Braid or Undertale and make me feel empty and guilty for becoming so obsessed that I've like robbed the game of its soul or something, but it honestly seems like it's just a crap ton of extra content. I'm actually kind of reminded of The Witness, which is a game mostly about itself. Its obdurate refusal to give any context to the world gives it a unique anxiety, but it also makes it clear that the world is made for the player. It's a deeply lonely experience in that way, which is not what I think the developers of Celeste were going for. This complaint is made stronger by the one criticism I have for the game's story. Like, the main story is about Madeline trying to climb this mountain, being prevented by a personification of her mental illness, attempting to leave that part of her behind, failing, and then finding out that her flaws and mental failings are an innate part of her that she needs to cope with and harness in order to achieve her life goals. That's just sweet. I love it. But while it is lovely, I think it's rushed. In Chapter 3, you meet my favorite character, Mr. Oshiro, and the entire chapter is dedicated to setting up an arc that is never resolved. Like, he's a ghost, right? And he haunts this hotel, constantly trying to impress people with it, but hurting himself in the hotel in the process. That's a good metaphor. But then you just leave him there. He's referred to again twice, and then he just shows up at the epilogue. I was almost expecting him to be the first of many characters that Madeline would meet along the way who failed to climb the mountain for some internal reason that would be cleverly shown in metaphor and mechanics like with Oshiro, but instead he's just a loose dumpling of a plot point. And for another example, after Madeline attempts to abandon the bad parts of her and catastrophically fails, you fall all the way back down the mountain. The entire turnaround for this is contained within one chapter. The second act low point lasts for like a minute before you get a pep talk from Granny and go back to forcefully hug your panic anxiety and continue up. It just feels rushed. And I wouldn't complain if this game didn't have like 30 hours of post-credits content. Matt Makes Games, if that is your real name, did you consider using any of this to flesh out the story a little bit? Why didn't you? What about this demanded to be relegated to this contextless limbo? I know why they did it. This decision is once again born out of the developer's desire to not frustrate the player, as putting the satisfying ending of the story behind more challenging material might drive some people away. They didn't want to leave the difficult content out of the game though for people like me, so they just kind of threw it in there. This was a poor decision, and I think Celeste would have been more satisfying if the B-sides were either left out entirely or incorporated into the main story path in some way. I prefer the second option. The problem here is that the developers of Celeste perceive player frustration as a sign that things have gone wrong. The result is a difficult game with no real friction, no real satisfaction. Also, the soundtrack is mediocre, so why bring up this game? Well, I think Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is the perfect refutation of every criticism I have with Celeste. Let me explain what I mean. Getting Over It is a very quiet game. It doesn't have any music besides the soft piano and occasional blues standards that play whenever you lose a lot of progress. It's an excellent subversion of the loud and often bloody rage game aesthetic that Super Meat Boy popularized. Getting Over It lets the experience of failure and loss speak for itself. This calm and stagnant atmosphere has another purpose though. Along with the slapdash aesthetic and lack of traditional narrative, it gives the player nothing to consider besides the act of climbing and falling. All focus is brought onto the mechanics, the experience of interacting with this mountain, that experience of frustration from the moment-to-moment experience of controlling Diogenes to the cataclysmic losses of progress. But this also forces some level of self-reflection. One really has to ask why they are still playing this when it feels so bad to play. This introspection leads to two possible outcomes. One, the player realizes their time is better spent elsewhere and quits the game. Getting Over It is a very easy game to quit. I know this because I took about a 2-week-long break from it after falling from Orange Hell all the way back to the grill for the 20th goddamn time. I think this is generally because the world is so static. There's no heads-up display, no systems to manage, no health, no visible timer. Your losses of progress are barely even formally recognized. It's just you and the mouse. It honestly feels less like a game and more like a sculpture that I'm interacting with. There's a distinct indifference I feel from this game. The only thing it allows to push you to finishing it is your own will. And if that will isn't there, you can just stop and it doesn't feel bad. But perhaps this isn't your reaction. You ask yourself why you were playing, and you come out the other end still playing. Maybe you don't even know why yet, but Bennett Foddy gives you a hint once you get to this part, after what is likely about 5 hours of gameplay.
But on the off chance that you're playing this, what I'm saying is, trash is disposable, but maybe it doesn't have to be approachable. What's the feeling like? Are you stressed? I guess you don't hate it if you got this far, feeling frustrated. It's underrated. An orange is sweet, juicy fruit locked inside a bitter peel. That's not how I feel about a challenge. I only want the bitterness. It's coffee. It's grapefruit. It's licorice.
And this is where I hope the epiphany occurs. In Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, frustration is the intended aesthetic goal. You play Getting Over It to experience frustration in the same way you read a tragic novel to experience sadness or watch a scary movie to experience fear. Negative emotions are an integral part of artistic experiences, so why can't frustration be as well? I also love the foods he mentions here to support his point. He could have said that it's like gunpowder, raw meat, and blood, but instead he chose bitter foods that are loved for their bitterness. A good cup of black coffee gives an invigorating impression of earth and dirt that isn't present in sweeter drinks. Grapefruit juice is used as a mixer in alcoholic beverages, and black licorice is just unequivocally the best candy, don't at me. Now, this wouldn't work at all if Getting Over It didn't make any case for the use of frustration as a deliverance of meaning, but I think it does this fantastically. It's time to get further into the narration. The very first section of the game is narrated from a very impersonal and objective position. It feels like a commentary track on a DVD. Bennett clearly explains his inspirations and intentions for making the game and his general design philosophy. Devil's Chimney is a gateway to a pretty massive topic switch. Bennett Foddy will only get to the point after you really get a hang of the controls.
For years now, people have been predicting that games would soon be made out of prefabricated objects, bought in a store and assembled into a world. And for the most part, that hasn't happened, because the objects in the stores are trash. I don't mean they look bad or that they're badly made, although a lot of them are. I mean they're trash in the way that food becomes trash as soon as you put it in the sink. Things are made to be consumed and used in a certain context, and once the moment is gone, they transform into garbage. In the context of technology, those moments pass by in seconds.
1. He suddenly starts dropping massive statements on greater society. 2. He starts rhyming.
Facebook's got lifelike bots with unbranded adverts and candid shots of Kanye and Taylor Swift mashups, car crash epic failed GIFs, Russian dashcam vids, discussions of McRibs, discarded, forgotten, unrecycled, muddled, rotten, untitled.
I think the rhyming is a great way of subtly growing away from the commentary-esque tone that he struck at the beginning. Bennett almost detaches himself from his own persona, becoming a character in the game's universe. But looking closer at what he's saying, he's bringing sharp attention to the context in which the game you are playing was created, a vast digital landscape where things can be easily forgotten and discarded. This game might not be an antidote, but it is an alternative. Unlike a lot of games, getting over it feels like work, and I found that surprisingly refreshing. And another thing, this game isn't very long, but this punishing difficulty does nothing less than guarantee that no one who reaches the summit will ever forget it. The mechanics are so dependent on the shapes and angles you come across. It's tactile and vivid. It's not a question of skill or precision, but texture and force. Ever since I finished getting over it for the first time, I've had this entire mountain mapped out in my head from beginning to end, and the memory hasn't faded in the slightest. I still vividly remember how the third floating rock from the left has this flat part on one side that makes it awkward to know exactly where to pogo off of. I still remember that goddamn bucket. Okay, actually, Bennett, I want to take back my complaints about the bucket, because honestly, every reason I've even mentioned it beyond necessity is due to it randomly bouncing your hammer off 9 times out of 10. Same with the invisible footholds on the ice cliff. I hate it. The fact that this nondescript pile of pre-made assets has managed to stick so steadfast in my mind is a triumph, and it's all due to the experience of interacting with it. It couldn't be a better case for frustration as an aesthetic goal. But, you've already heard all of this from Errant Signal. It's all nice, but none of this is why Getting Over It is my favorite game. So, if Devil's Chimney acts as a gateway to Bennett's slam poem about cultural trash, then Orange Hell serves as another, even more impenetrable gateway to another change in theme. Bennett Foddy's commentary begins shifting to a far more sincere tone, and as we grow closer and closer to the end, he falls almost to a whisper.
Now, you've conquered the ice cliff, the platforms, the church, and the rectory, the living room and the factory, the playground, the construction site, the granite rocks, and the lakeside. You've learned to hike. There's no way left to go but up, and in a moment I'll shut up. But let me say, I'm glad you came.
And when the player finishes the game, he gives his genuine and tearful thanks.
I dedicate this game to you, the one who came this far. I give it to you with all my love.
I've spent a long time trying to figure out exactly why this last stretch of narration affected me so deeply, and even longer trying to put it into words, but I think I got it. The middle section of the game is pretty explicitly cynical. Bennett Foddy violently tears down digital culture and represents it as a trash heap of artworks and assets ripped from their original context. But in the last section, as the game grows more forgiving, save the snake, he makes a sudden twist to a far more optimistic tone. Because Getting Over It isn't just a meditation on frustration and anger as an experience, it's more than that. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is an anthem. Now, Bennett is an accomplished developer, and Getting Over It is a perfectly functional game. However, it's built to give the impression of shoddiness and amateurity. Its main mechanic is an explicit homage to Sexy Hiking, a free game from 2002 that gained cult classic status from its complete inaccessibility. But why is Sexy Hiking worth emulating? Well, it's essentially the video game equivalent of a kid recording themselves playing an acoustic guitar in their bedroom. Sure, it's badly recorded and they probably can't sing all that well, but it has a distinctly endearing and relatable quality. Getting Over It aims to give this impression as well. It aims to foster relatability through complete and utter inaccessibility. The character of Bennett Foddy the narrator, as played by Bennett Foddy, begins as a pessimist, asking why one should even bother making a demanding or inaccessible piece of art in the context of this culture blur we call the internet. In the final stretch of the mountain, this question is answered. Bennett Foddy, the narrator, is an artist who wishes deeply to have his art recognized and enjoyed, but instead of making Celeste, he made Getting Over It. But why? Well, the narrator wishes to be recognized for his own honest vision, his own taste. Really, Getting Over It feels much more like an homage to amateur outsider art in general. It's an homage to asset flips or barely functional explorations of mechanics made with programmer art or surreal narrative experiments made in the free version of Unity. And not even just video games either. Getting Over It stands for unlistenable sound collages produced in Audacity and self-published poetry on Amazon. It's an anthem for inaccessibility. There's a negative connotation towards these kinds of works built for the joy of building them and no other reason. It's a kind of perceived selfishness or arrogance that's associated with making art for its own sake. Bennett Foddy aims to show that there is more honesty in these works than is initially realized. Getting Over It is a gift to whoever has a taste for Bennett's special brand of gameplay experience. It's a gift to whoever puts the work in to finish the game, and this is far more personal and honest than anything made to explicitly please an audience. Getting Over It is a refutation to the notion that inaccessible art is made out of cynicism or disregard towards consumers. But more importantly, it shows how these works can still survive in the internet age, or even how the internet has let these works survive and flourish. You get to experience that connection that the narrator is seeking so desperately. You get to be that one imaginary person that he made the game for, and this is the single greatest piece of motivation that an artist can experience in this day and age. In accordance with the wishes of the developer, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but let me just say that it fits this theme perfectly. I'll just say that after you finish the game, this optimistic message grows even stronger. At the end of the day, the reason I made this video is because Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy inspired me. It motivated me as an artist. It reminded me why I even make music in the first place. I made this video because I want this game's message to get out to more people. I want it to inspire you too. I want it to motivate you to make some cultural trash of your own, be it a game, film, album, book, or something else. Take yourself seriously. Don't make something for everyone, because no one can do that, not even Matt Thorson. Craft a gift for the audience you want, not the one that wants you. Thanks for watching.